Water. Cold, clear, delicious. But also can be a means of transportation for harmful pathogens. That's right. As clean and refreshing as it may look, pathogen-filled water can be dangerous on the farm. I know what you're thinking. Plants need water to grow. But they need the right kind of water, at the right time, applied in the right way. Otherwise, that water, which can be so good, can turn out to be a source of cross-contamination. We use that water in different ways. Irrigation, fertigation, crop sprays, cooling, frost protection, keeping down dust. And anytime this water comes into contact with produce, it can pose a potential food safety hazard. Many outbreaks of foodborne illnesses have been caused by contaminated water. How can we reduce the chances for water to contaminate crops? We have to look at where our water comes from, check its quality, and then decide how to apply it in the safest way at the safest time. We get water from 3 sources: public water supplies, groundwater, and surface water. Public water is water treated by the local water utility. This is the safest water source, treated to kill dangerous microbes. This is the water we can drink out of our faucets. If we have any concerns about our connection to the public water supply, we'll test it. But typically, public water is safe. Groundwater is water from wells. Often, this is where farms get water. Wellheads need to be inspected and elevated. Backflow devices need to be added to prevent contamination from runoff. Well water is generally safe, but needs to be tested to ensure safety. Surface water, which we find in streams, irrigation ditches, reservoirs, and ponds, is the water source most prone to contamination, especially fecal contamination from runoff and animal intrusion. Surface water needs to be tested regularly, especially if it will be used for irrigation or otherwise potentially come in contact with food. There are 3 ways we use this water to irrigate: drip, flood, and overhead sprinklers. Sprinklers are the highest risk form of irrigation because water comes into direct contact with the plant leaves and produce. If water is contaminated, that contamination is spraying over your whole crop, especially if it's a crop of leafy greens like lettuce. That's a problem. Flood irrigation is less risky than sprinklers, but if water gets contaminated through contact with soil and then comes into contact with produce, well, that's a risk. Drip irrigation is by far the safest form of irrigation, since no water contacts the actual produce, unless your produce happens to be a root. But drip is also the most effective system. Not that we're naming winners here, but drip irrigation gets a medal. If you do use sprinklers or flood methods, what can you do to make sure your crops stay safe? Since pathogens can die out over time with exposure to sunlight and heat and other things, you can use direct irrigation early in the season, well before harvest, so those pathogens have a chance to die off. But this isn't foolproof. Some pathogens will survive, like little pathogen zombies. And some like the water, a lot. And what happens if you see an E. coli spike in your water? Don't panic, and don't take a sip either. Remember, pathogens can die over time with exposure to sunlight and heat. But it's best to contact the Department of Agriculture to get to the bottom of the problem. As harvest season gets closer, turn to lower risk forms of irrigation, especially if you're using surface or flood irrigation. If you use overhead water too close to harvest, those little pathogens will be more likely than ever to make someone sick. You also need to regularly inspect the irrigation systems. Water can become contaminated at the source, but it can also get contaminated through the system. If you see debris, trash, or signs of animals, especially animal poop, around water pipes, let your supervisor know immediately. To further prevent contamination, water from every source should be tested and monitored regularly. With all these systems in place, as well as your sharp eyes looking for potential sources of contaminants, we can take steps to creating a safer food system. Cheers!